Welcome everyone. This is Eswatini Sexual and Gender Minorities webinar. It's a Wednesday, so you know how we do it on Wednesdays. Right now, I'm going to give over to Alex, who I am, the CEO of Who I Am, who is going to be moderating today's session. She's joined by clinical psychologist, Miss Senela Mdluli, who, by the way, just got off another webinar where she was speaking about her profession. I must say it is quite a beautiful time for her profession at the moment where she is being sought after more than ever before. So I will give over to Minetla right now so that she can take over.
Hi guys, hi. Can everyone hear me? Oh yeah, brilliant. I was a bit unsure. I've been dealing with a few technical issues. But thank you. Hi, Miss Mdluli. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you feeling?
I'm good, and you?
I'm really good. I'm really good.
Okay.
So thank you guys. I will be hosting you today. My name is Alex. I am the CEO of Who I Am, but today I am here specifically and strictly as a human being who cares about you and kind of recognizes the journey that we all have to go through as LGBTQ people. I'm really excited to be able to host this topic. It is very personal to me because I personally have been through this journey myself, and that is how I recognize why it's so necessary to have that kind of professional guidance, the kind of guidance that I didn't really have access to when I was going through my own self-discovery and recognizing my own sexual orientation. And that is really what coming out is, which is primarily why it's the reason we focused on it. In terms of LGBTQ parenting, there are a host of topics that you could talk about when it comes to LGBTQ people and parenting, but we decided to focus primarily on the emotional journey, on the psychological impact. And we're going to go through the entire journey from the individual's perspective as well as the people around them, particularly the people closest to them, and these are their parents, because you don't really live on an island. That's the honest truth. And your sexual identity, your sexual orientation and gender identity, it does impact other people. And at the end of the day, the aim is to create a cohesion between yourself and the people around you. It is to create a healthy relationship and not just have you. We want you to be happy with who you are, but we want you to enjoy healthy relationships with the people around you. And that is why Miss Mdluli is here to kind of help guide us through that process to creating that healthy relationship that all of us, I believe, would like to have. So Miss Mdluli, may I ask, the first question that I have is, could you take us through why exactly an LGBTQ person would actually be reluctant to come out to their family, to their parents, to the people close to them? What are the feelings that cause them to kind of stay in the closet, to choose to stay in the closet rather than just be open about who they are?
I think the first reason obviously would be the fact that society has these very clear these very absolute and binary standards on what is normal and what is not normal sexual or gender-based behavior. And I think once a person starts to recognize that their sexual preference, so I think once that that becomes with the development of gender identity, which usually happens quite early, usually by the age of 7 years, there's a kind of a more heightened awareness of I'm a girl or I'm a boy, and then society has already kind of gone, this is how it's normal to be a boy, this is what girls act like, and the stereotypical ways of behavior can cause discomfort as soon as someone realizes that they to behave. So I think then that can also be then an issue because, sorry, I'm being disturbed. The people who are coming in and then there's a sound that comes through. And I think this can also make it difficult then because then there's an othering that then becomes internalized. If my preference is not normal, if how I'm feeling inside does not seem to be to correspond to what society or my family or the people outside me that I love are saying I should be, it's making it uncomfortable. And then the other part to that is the fact that we often have to then on top of that, deal with the attitudes in terms of coming out. And we have to also think about this process of coming out. Who dictates coming out? You know, why do people have to come out also? You know, the whole social construct of coming out. What is it about? You know, because as a do heterosexuals have to come out? You know, there's the whole social construct around that, because it's coming out as if there's this, I want us to deconstruct also the idea that there's something wrong that you kind of have to finally confess to. Say, yes, this thing that you guys were suspecting, it is that. That heterosexuals do not experience, because their experiences are assumed to be normal. And that is part of what also makes it difficult, that you have to come out and kind of confess and say, this is what I am, and to prove it, you know, that I don't fit this. And I think there's a narrative around that we need to start, that makes it also more difficult, that you have to declare it, that you have to declare your sexual orientation and your sexual preference. Something that if it was normalized and was not stigmatized, you wouldn't have to, because it is personal and should not really, in a just world, impact on your human dignity and your access to certain things in society. But which, unfortunately, because it is stigmatized, can be stigmatized in some places, then leads to that. And obviously, one of the things that can make it difficult is attitudes that the person sees towards people who don't fit the gender binary of being heterosexual. That can also make it difficult. What do they see? What does the media tell you? How are people, effeminate young men in schools treated like? That again adds to that, you know. Do we see, does this person who eventually has to come out experience seeing a person like them, similarly to them, who might also be gay, being treated in a way that is unjust? That also adds to the difficulty. And I guess also it also comes down to the parent-child relationship, most importantly. What kind of relationship does the parent have with the child? Is it one that is open? Is it one that is healthy? Because often where there's poor communication, where there's distrust, where there's emotional distance, any kind of honest communication, in the absence of that between a parent and child, even if it's not related to LGBTQI coming out, it is going to be difficult. So I think that is also quite important. What kind of relationship does the parent has the parent cultivated with the child?
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. And I absolutely love the fact that you really touch about how society really places us in a box and kind of dictates who you should be. You touch a little bit on the normalization of being LGBTQ, and I recognize that a part of the reason why it becomes very difficult to talk about who you are is because of this unwritten bargain that you go into with society that says if you act a particular way, if you are a particular person, then in return you're going to receive certain things. So for example, you're going to get the right job, you're going to meet the right people, you know, you're going to get into the right schools. So if you choose to operate according to the rules of this bargain that is based on perfection, that is based on submission, and that is based on obedience, then you are guaranteed a particular kind of life, in a particular level of acceptance from both your parents and again society as a whole. Now, can we talk a little bit more about how a negative, or I guess an unhealthy relationship between a parent and a child actually looks like? External, outside of the sexual orientation, what kind of relationship would create an environment where the child doesn't feel comfortable disclosing their identity or disclosing something that is so personal to them?
Okay. So I think a healthy relationship, healthy parent-child relationship, is one where there's honest and open communication. I think that's very, very important. I always say to parents, your child, you should be the first port of call for your child. Someone touched them inappropriately, they should be comfortable coming to you and say, is it normal to feel this way? Or your little boy has an erection. Are they comfortable to show you their boner? Because for them, it's a very innocent form of exploration. And do you normalize that and say, yeah, that happens sometimes? You know, for me, it is about how open is the communication. Is it a comfortable level of communication? Do you talk with your child? Do you engage meaningfully? So that for me is quite important. A lot of the times we find that because of life stresses and distractions, that sometimes the parent-child relationship is reduced to a functional one. A functional one being reduced to the roles, right? Child comes home from school, does homework, parent checks homework, little engagement, mommy cooks, we go to sleep, mom pays school fees, are you ready for school, drop you off at school. Not actually seeing the child, what's your favorite color? Let's cook together. What do you like? Do you want to help me chop? Just an active kind of engagement, that is not bound by extremes, by extremes being you've done something wrong and now I have to discipline you, or you've achieved something, now I must praise you. But what happens in the in-between? So I think for me, the quality of relating is related to the small everyday functioning of parenting that has to be active, that has to be mindful, that also has to be sensitive to child's needs. And it is not, unfortunately, built in a short space of time. And sometimes parents refer their children because they're worried about certain behavior. And one of the things we have to talk about is the relationship. And by the time we get there, maybe, for instance, I'm seeing a 16-year-old, we are seeing the effects of a relationship that has happened over 16 years. The absence of certain things that have been missing in communication. And then you get a frustrated parent who's saying, my child is not opening up to me, not talking to me, and helping them to understand the fact that it is not going to happen overnight. It is something that is built. So I think communication and openness are very, very important. And a child, I encourage that healthy relationship is where a child is able to bring their good and their bad to their parent. That they can bring my I'm not happy. They can bring my I'm angry mommy. They can bring I'm happy. Your child you need to be able to, because you're the adult in the relationship, to hold your child's emotions and help it make sense. And I think that's very, very important. But often the time, because of parenting roles and ideas that we have in our minds, we find that often children struggle to bring their difficult emotions to their parents. I'm not supposed to get angry if maybe mom spoke to me this way. I'm not supposed to say, mommy, you should say sorry when you do this, because it's wrong to do that. And then we start to see how slowly the relationship where the child is not bringing themselves, they are good and they are bad, because it has been regulated from a very early age. And I think finally, also, I think a relationship that has healthy boundaries is quite important. There needs to be consistency in parenting. There needs to be discipline, because also parenting comes with a responsibility to teach important skills that are hard to cultivate in adults, but which are learned more easily at home, such as empathy, such as politeness, such as respect for others, such as taking responsibility, having chores around the house. And those are things that are also quite important. So also, whilst we want the openness and the communication, we also want to see consistency and discipline in that. So that is the presence of health. And by discipline, I'm not speaking about corporal punishment. By discipline, I'm speaking about structure. I'm speaking about consistency. I'm speaking about mindfulness in parenting, and finding ways of correcting behavior that can be problematic. I hope I've kind of covered that.
Yes, you did. That was very informative. That was very insightful. And I recognize that what I've learned is that a lot of the damage that is created between the parent-child dynamic is damage that is created over time. It's not really kind of instantaneous. So a lot of the time, I guess we kind of assume that your parent, that parent-child dynamic between an LGBTQ person and their family member is actually destroyed as a result of their coming out. So now you kind of recognize that, no, that's actually just a symptom of an otherwise unopen or just essentially negative and destructive relationship that has been building over time. So this now leads me to a question where what kind of feelings, why would a parent avoid having these kind of uncomfortable conversations with their child, that would lead to the child being afraid to disclose their sexual orientation or gender identity. For now, I'm not going to focus primarily on homophobia, but what kind of, okay, how can I say this? The parent is a human being as well with their own experiences. So what kind of experiences would lead to this parent creating a parent-child relationship whereby it leads to a very kind of, where they're afraid of having these uncomfortable conversations, where we know that when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to anything that makes you a little bit uncomfortable, I can't talk to you about that as my child. What leads to a parent having that kind of fear, that kind of attitude?
Okay, I think first of all it comes with socialization, them also learning about what is acceptable and unacceptable sexual behavior, their own attitudes that they found in their upbringing, what they see, their own attitudes towards sexuality, sexual attitudes, which also speaks a lot to the importance of, from an early age, even before people become parents, about raising awareness about the different forms and expressions of sexual preference and sexual orientation, because sometimes there's a tendency to narrow it to the gender, to the binary, and I think that's quite important. And then there's the dominant narrative, which can be stigmatizing in terms of the way people who are LGBTQ can be treated, in terms of the access, in terms of also the attitudes that are carried in social structures, such as religious structures, such as religious institutions, and the lack of recognition of LGBTQ rights, because all of that feeds into a narrative that's saying that there's something wrong with that. And the parent might then internalize this, and then they see certain traits in their child, and immediately they want to respond in the same way that society might respond and say, this is not acceptable, you shouldn't do this, you must behave this way. And then that can also lead to that. So it can also deal with how the parent chooses to filter the information that is provided to them based on and can also be influenced by lack of awareness. It can also be influenced by their own fears around and what they project onto their child around having a child who doesn't fit a specific kind of sexual orientation, how they feel about that. Because sometimes one of the difficulties that comes with parenting is that people can sometimes project their own issues and want to live out their own life desires onto their children, even beyond sexual orientation. You must become this, you must be like this, then I will feel proud. And that is a lot. Sometimes it's something we need to talk to our parents about. Your child is their own full person outside of you. And part of that conversation is also that difficulty on letting your child be and allowing them to unfold into their own purpose and unfolding into the way that they were created and made to be, not as an extension of you or a reflection of your self-worth and your dignity or whatever you assume what they do is a reflection of. So that also becomes another dimension that we need to talk about. So it's also a big part of it is about the parents' fears, the parents' attitudes, the parents' relational skills, ability to communicate, and also how they've been raised in terms of the attitudes and the issues towards persons with LGBT, persons with persons who identify as LGBTQ.
Oh, wow, that's lovely. So what I'm kind of getting is that there could be a number of reasons ranging from, again, socialization. This is my religious belief says ABC, therefore I'm not going to, I cannot accept who you are because it goes against what I believe. It could be a projection of their own fears. And I'd like to kind of expand on that a little bit, because I've recognized that could it be also kind of a misguided form of love, right? Which is, as a parent, I have these aspirations for you, I have these dreams for you, I want you to achieve certain levels of success, and those levels of success are dependent upon you operating according to certain rules that society has created. So by you now not walking according to these rules, I'm now afraid that you will not be able to live the kind of life that I have always wanted you to have. Like you said, I'm kind of projecting my own dreams onto you. If I dreamt of you becoming a doctor and now you coming out as LGBTQ means that you may not be accepted into university as a result of the discrimination. So rather than recognizing the bravery of this journey, I'm just going to focus on the fear of my expectations of your life not being met. And then that then comes off to you as a form of rejection. It actually is a rejection, because it's a rejection of me of my identity and me as an individual. And it actually becomes I guess you're really just clutching onto your expectations of what you have always wanted for me and wanted out of my life. So I'm recognizing that there's kind of a lot of learned negative behavior, a lot of negative patterns that the parent picks up throughout their own life that then influence how they will then look at the LGBTQ person. It's not a situation whereby it's an innate thing, it's rather a learned behavior. So how would one go about unlearning such toxic thought patterns and such toxic behaviors that would then lead to creating a healthier relationship between the parent and the LGBTQ child?
I think with any form of change, I think one of the things that I've learned, obviously change, any form of changing dynamics that we now see as problematic, as not beneficial, as harmful, as pathologizing, it can come with any form of change comes with some resistance, right? But the only way we make the change is by persisting in a particular message. And I think we need to be consistent in our awareness raising, And I think part of with parents, because a lot of the children are growing up in families. So we need to not just be engaging the child if we're speaking to children and adolescents and young adults, essentially, but we really need to be engaging parents on this conversation. It should really become normal in terms of parenting skills, in terms of awareness raising, having conversations about your child's sexual orientation and your attitudes towards that and your bias, and challenging that, having difficult but hopefully safe conversations, because I think it is important to have that. We need to raise awareness and we need to encourage help seeking, because I think part of when this is not processed, when there's no acceptance, where there's rejection, or where there's a parent who is dictating the terms of what the child should be, it can cause friction, can cause mental health difficulties. It's quite important then that we make help accessible to those parents. I think sometimes we need to, because sometimes for them to express their fears and their frustrations, often it cannot, to make it not happen at the level of the relationship and not taken out there, they need an outlet outside, whether it is professional and therapeutic, to be able to speak about their fears and anxieties and understand where they come from, and hopefully start to question and unlearn some of the beliefs that they have that are not beneficial, that are not healthy, and to deconstruct them. And hopefully form better ideas, which are much more healthier around parenting and also about being the parent to someone who identifies as LGBTQ.
Yeah, that's very true. Change is very difficult. That is very true. And there's in general, like the mind just says, I already know this, and now you're asking me to go down a completely different path and put in all this efforts to become a different person. You're asking too much. I've become very comfortable with this thought process, with this way of living. I cannot be someone else. So it's become a lot easier. And this really does impact really every area of your life. Now you talk about how there are mental health implications for the LGBTQ person as a result of their parents, I guess, projecting their own dreams and their own insecurities onto them. What exactly do these mental health difficulties look like? How would they manifest in someone's life, in this LGBTQ person's life, and how would it then affect their quality of life?
Okay, so the parent-child relationship, I think for me, just in general, as a psychologist, the parent-child relationship is just very important, because your primary caregiver, the person who gives you life and who you form in the first relationship, affects the way that you see the world and you relate to it. right? In the way that you learn about trust, in the way you learn about whether the world is safe, in the way you learn about yourself is reflected through another. And often what we see is that this relationship, in terms of attachment theory, it affects how we then, even as adults, relate to other people. You know, do we trust easily and all of that? And I think sometimes it often happens that when there hasn't been a healthy parenting, because let me not reduce it always, it's not always the biological parent who's a primary caregiver, but where there has been a primary caregiving, something that has damaged that relationship or has affected it and has caused an absence, whether actively in physical or whether by the absence of active participation and relating, it does in general compromise person's mental health in terms of an inner sense of resilience and an inner sense of being able to trust the world and feel that it is safe. So even already before you are dealing with issues around I'm living in a world that is LGBTQ, if you don't have that inner sense of trust or an inner sense that you're carrying with you from an early age of feeling loved, of feeling accepted, of feeling like the world is safe, already that is making you vulnerable. And then already now you are dealing with a world that is already making you doubtful, that can easily make you doubtful because of the sexual orientation that you have chosen. So already we are coming now with a shaky foundation. And it compromises you because you're more likely not having that base that is supportive and safe to go back to, even within, as a resource within you, or as the physical presence of someone saying, it's okay, I accept you the way that you are, or as a memory that you hold inside of your mind of love and of safety. Then it becomes harder to cope with life stresses. So you become more vulnerable to your depression, to your anxiety, which obviously, and other mental health issues. You struggle to cope, you struggle more with relationships, obviously, and it makes it much more difficult to cope with stigma and discrimination. Whereas if the relationship is healthy and it's solid and there's a level of self-accept, of being accepted, of feeling loved the way that you are, dealing with all the negativity and the stigma and the dominant narratives that might challenge the way that you are and choose to express yourself in the world becomes a much easier place because you have an emotional support base. Don't know if that answers your question. I hope it does.
No, it really does. You've really kind of clarified a few things. And I absolutely love the fact that you brought up trust issues. Because one thing that we actually joke about when it comes to the LGBTQ community is we talk about the lesbian U-Haul, or we talk about how LGBTQ relationships don't really last. And it has become almost it's kind of a running joke. We kind of expect that, oh yeah, we're gonna date for a few months, break up, and then move on to the next thing. It's a unicorn relationship, the one between LGBTQ partners that actually last for an extended period of time. And I only just realized that it's because of the trust issues that a lot of us are probably going to pick up as a result of not having that supportive relationship from our primary caregivers. So we go into that relationship already expecting it, or already expecting the worst from this person because we have always received that, and that definitely reduces the ability, the lasting power of that relationship. And we usually make a joke about that, but now I'm recognizing that this is actually the result of very serious mental health issues. It is incredible. It actually affects our ability to form lasting and healthy adult relationships. These are the kind of things that you almost take for granted, I guess, as an LGBTQ person. Like, oh yeah, who cares? I can just date the next person. You know what I mean?
Yes, but also just to point out how healthy relationships function in a healthy kind of social support system. So it's the history, the attachment history from early parenting relationships, but also how even heterosexual relationships can more easily function. And I'm not saying they are all functional because they can have problems, but also what helps is the social support that comes. You're in a heterosexual relationship, you're having issues with your partner, you have the church to go to, you have your family, right? And then now you're dealing with a situation where you're kind of LGBTQ. So there's a lack of acceptance from the church, possibly. There's lack of the family support. So you become more vulnerable to relationshiping in isolation without the social support system that normally supports couple relationships and can ease some of the normal everyday functions in relating. And that can make it more difficult also. So those are individual issues that are brought on from family of origin, and then there's coming into trying to form a lasting relationship and union in a space that is not socially supportive for your relationship, and that makes it so much more difficult.
Oh, oh wow. And this is something we actually talk a lot about within the community, the importance of having a support system. And we usually talk about how important it is to have these gatherings amongst LGBTQ people where you have that support system that you never really had anywhere else. But now my question is, if you have a support system whereby you go in with your own dysfunctions, your own fears, your trust issues, and you go into the support system that is basically made up of people with their own dysfunction, operating out of their own fears and their own insecurities, and it creates kind of this cesspool of dysfunction. What exactly do you kind of expect out of that? Do you expect, I guess, positive outcomes to come of that? Do you believe that these are people who can come together and actually support each other and actually create a situation where they have a good quality of life? Or because everyone is acting out of their own dysfunction, is it possible that we actually end up destroying each other rather than creating that support that we actually are searching for?
I think it can be both. It's about the delicate line of the fact that we bring our issues, and people bring their issues anywhere in any place. They might, anywhere, any step, and even me as Senele, wherever I am, I bring my stuff. I bring my good stuff. I bring my good things, but I bring the not likable parts. And I think when you're dealing with minority groups that are vulnerable to discrimination and to violence, and who have to take on a form of activism to sort of, unfortunately, defend their reason for being, it already is a very emotionally draining space, because you're fighting for your humanity, and that is very, very emotionally draining, for your right to exist as you are. And I think there's importance when you're doing the work, because there's a lot of activism, we need access to this, but there also needs to be activism about the mental health of activism and how it takes its toll, and how it's important that you guys find ways of creating spaces that are supportive in terms of that. Whether it's being able to say, okay, we are meeting, but we are not doing any activism or planning. We are doing stuff that's related to our self-care. We are checking in with one another. We have support groups for people who maybe have suffered from trauma or violence. We are actively doing things that are protective of our mental health. And I think in activism, that's the last part, the part that people tend to forget about taking care of themselves. It's just about the work. We are fighting, we are doing this, which is great. But I think what we often see when there's conflict is that all that anger and frustration, which actually sometimes it's not even really, oftentimes probably not even directed to the people that are supportive, who are in the same boat as you. It's at society, it's at this institution, it's an existing in the society that does this, that then comes to the surface. But if you normalized, actually prioritized mindfully your emotional well-being, I think it would really, really have an impact on that. So I think mental health within LGBTQ is very important, but I think that also it is very under supported at the moment, and that's important. And also to drive the activism. Yeah.
True. Thank you so much, Ms. Mdluli. We are actually out of time. I'd like to give a quick shout out to Nwanda. Thank you for your support, lovely lady. Thank you for joining us, and everyone who has been a part of this conversation. Please go to our page and share any other questions that you have, your thoughts, your comments that you have. If you'd like for us to have this conversation again, we would be more than happy to do it. I've learned so much myself, and it has been such a joy and an honor to be here with all of you. I love you all so much. Please enjoy the rest of your day and really just live happy lives. Love yourselves. Be happy. You deserve it. Bye, guys.